Welcome to my video lecture series in Game Concept and Production. This is Professor Janus Raymond Tan from the College of Computing and Engineering. In this video lecture, we will cover the topics about the overview of game design process. Throughout this video, we will discuss the note on constraints, generating ideas, prototyping, and the non-digital designer's prototyping kit. We have already made some games in this course, so we have already been through the creation process on a small scale. But our method of design for the most part has been ad hoc. Here are a bunch of elements, just throw them together and call it a game. The results of this type of design can be expected to be hit and miss. What about for larger projects where the stakes are higher? Is there a process that can be followed that will lead to better games? There is the iterative process, to be sure, but we have not gone into detail on any of the iterative steps: design, playtesting, evaluation. How exactly do you come up with an initial design? What is the most effective way to playtest? When evaluating a game, what do you look for? And how do you know what to change? These are the things we will be concerned with throughout the rest of this course. Throughout this lesson, we will examine the first step of the iterative process, which is the initial design. A note on constraints. The process of game design can be viewed as having successive layering of constraints. Every new rule you add, every resource you define, this is just one more constraint on the players. At the start of the design process, you may have nothing, and the players could do anything at all. But by the end, the player experience is sharply defined and heavily constrained in a way that is fun. To put this in perspective, consider the so-called genre of open-world video games, the Grand Theft Auto, as an example. The typical player reaction is that these games let you do anything. They give complete freedom to the player, and that is why they are fun. By critically looking at this game shows that it does not give complete freedom, and that is because of constraints or something that will limit you to do things which are not permitted in the game mechanics or rules. The game can actually constrain the players in many ways. Number one, there are only certain ways a player can move. In Grand Theft Auto, we cannot crawl or fly on its own. Number two, a defined set of objects can interact with, and the autonomous computer-controlled agents that wander around are governed by specific algorithms. Examples are the bystanders or the people walking in GTA. You can interact with the vehicles, guns, buildings available but not all. Number 3. The player has many decisions and a relatively open set of goals, to be sure, but there is a great deal of constraints that lead to this illusion of being able to do anything. There are missions to be accomplished which sometimes limit the player to do anything with the game, considering the Grand Theft Auto. Now, generating ideas. The first thing that happens in the design is that you must come up with a basic core of an idea. This isn't necessarily fully formed, but just a basic concept. There are many different starting points for a game's design. Here are some examples in no particular order. Number 1. Start with the core aesthetics. What do you want the player to feel? What do you want them to react? What should the player experience be like? Then work backwards from the player experience to figure out a set of rules that will achieve the desired aesthetic. Example, do you want them to experience what it's like during the ancient period or the time when dinosaurs exist? Number 2, start with a rule or system that you observe in everyday life, particularly one that requires people to make interesting decisions. Look at the world around you. What systems do you see that would make good games? Example, the system for quarantine period during this pandemic. I think you can generate your own game idea using that system. Number 3, start with an existing proven design, then make modifications to improve on it, or what we call the clone and tweak method. This often happens when making sequels and ports of existing games. Think of a game that you thought had potential, but didn't quite take the experience as far as they could. How would you make it better? Example, the different versions of NBA mobile game which is released every year, the Need for Speed, Final Fantasy, etc. Number 4, start with technology, such as a new game engine for video games or special kind of game piece like a rotatable base for miniature figures. Find a way to make use of it in the game. What kinds of items do you have lying around your living space that have never been used in a board game before but would make a great game bits? Number 5, start with materials from other sources such as existing art or game mechanics that didn't make it into other projects. Design a game and make use of them. Do you have an art portfolio or earlier game designs that you didn't turn into finished products? What about public domain works such as Renaissance art? How could you design a game around this? Number 6, start with a narrative and then design game rules to fit, making a story-driven game. What kinds of stories work well in games nowadays? You can try thinking of making a game based from a love story, a life experiences, or even our new normal setup for education. Number 7, start with market research. Perhaps you know that a certain demographic is underserved and what to design a game specifically for them. Or maybe you just know that a certain genre is hot right now and that there are no major games that type uh, out in a certain range of dates. So there is an opportunity. How do you turn this knowledge into a playable game? How can also You can also consider demographics of or the player's age range and find or research for games that can be marketed to them. Number 8, combinations of several of these. For example, starting with core aesthetics and narrative at the same time, you can make a game where the story and gameplay are highly integrated. Prototyping. Remember, the more times you can iterate on your idea, the better the final game will be. Once you have the basic idea, the next step is to get it in playable form as quickly and cheaply as possible. That will leave you with as much time as possible to playtest and iterate. Iteration is the most critical for those parts of your game that have high design risk. For clone and tweak games, where you are mostly lifting a gameplay from an existing game, rapid prototyping is less important. This does not mean that clone games do not benefit from iteration, but simply that you should use it selectively in those areas you are innovating. Now, for the loss of prototyping, remember that the entire purpose of prototyping is to maximize the number of iterative cycles. Corollary, do everything you can to reduce the time required for each iteration. Now, consider that each iterative cycle consists generally of 4 steps: design, prototyping, playtesting, and evaluation. Of these steps, where can you save time? So you can really reduce the time it takes to design the rules of the game without compromising your goals because you can rush creativity. You can reduce the time spent in playtesting by being efficient about scheduling and designing playtests to give maximum information for minimum playtime. But there is a natural limit to this, and beyond a certain point, you can rush through playing the game. Evaluation doesn't take very long. You're making a simple yes or no decision of whether the game is done or good enough based on playtest results. There is a little to be gained by rushing through this further. So, this leaves reducing the time it takes to create a prototype. Things to keep in mind when building a playable prototype. Number 1, build it as fast as possible. Cut corners, make it as ugly and cheap as you can get away with it. See the example image of the paper prototype for the Pac-Man game. So this is created as fast as possible, as cheap as possible, because we will not focus entirely on the design since this is just a prototype. Minimize what you need to build. Only do what is absolutely necessary to evaluate your game. If you're trying to test out a new combat system, you do not need to build the entire exploration system. If you're making a card game, handwriting on index card is faster than typing everything into PowerPoint, printing on heavy cardstock, and cutting it all out manually. There is a time and place for making nice looking components, and the stages of the game design is not that time or that place. Number 3, make your prototype easy to change. You will find problems in playtesting, so make it easy to adjust on the fly. All of these guidelines push designers towards one inevitable decision: prototyping in paper. You can call it paper or cardboard or non-digital or analog or any number of things, but the idea is to have a physical tabletop game that is playable without computers, or at least without requiring programmable code. Programming is wonderful and powerful, but it is also slow and expensive in comparison to paper prototypes. Here are some advantages of paper prototypes. It is cheap. Most systems can be prototyped with a little more than a pencil and some paper, although I will give suggestions for other components for those of you that have some money to spend. It's fast. You don't have to mess around with programming or layouts or artwork. Just write a few seconds on a scrap of paper. It's easy to change. Don't like one of your numbers? Erase it and write in a new one. There is no guilt about throwing it away. You came up with an idea that didn't work? Oh well, you lost a whole half hour. Big deal. It's like making stick figure drawings. If your first attempt at drawing a stick figure doesn't work, it only took you a few seconds, so just cross it out and try again. Paper can be used to model most gameplay systems. Yes, even most of the ones we normally associate with being specific to video games. By making something playable, you are forced to actually design the systems. No more hand waving of this game will have 50 undefined cards. You have to actually do your job as the game designer and design the game. Paper prototyping example. We can still make a game iterations even we will be dealing with paper prototype. The following will illustrate an example of a paper prototype of a game per iteration. For the first iteration, the image shows what will the game world look like when converted into a digital form of the game. The image shows the place where the game character will explore and interact. For the second iteration, the image shows what will the user interface will look like when converted into a digital form of the game. The image shows the score, health, time, lives, etc., which are all important factors of the game. What is good here is that we can put into place the possible content of the game, which would possibly has impact if we overlook into it. For the third iteration, the image shows how will the game be played in terms of user experience when converted into a digital form of the game. The image shows that the paper prototype will be a scrolling game that will allow the player to move sidewards. For the fourth and last iteration, the image shows the other objects of the game. In the given image, the player character is above the platform, which means it has provisions for jumping, moving, and standing in the platforms. With this idea, you have now the perspective of putting collisions between the player and the platform. Of course, not everything can be represented in a paper prototype, but at least what's important is you have a basis and a blueprint of your possible game. At the same time, it is easy and cheap to make a paper prototype instead of making a digital format for it. Will also require digital graphics design, animation, and programming. The non-digital designer's prototyping kit. What follows is a list of materials that is found useful when prototyping. Paper of several varieties, blank, lined, and graph. These are useful for general note-taking and for the fast construction of makeshift game boards and other surfaces. Colored pens and pencils. Obviously, you need something to write with. Colors gives an easy way to differentiate game elements or to annotate your game components. Index cards. These make it easy to make cards. They shuffle reasonably well. You can cut them in halves or thirds for different card sizes. You can also just write ideas down on this and tape them on the wall, making it easy to arrange your thoughts visually. These are versatile and cheap. Scissors and tape for breaking things apart and sticking them together respectively. These are to game design, and WD-40 and duct tape are to handymen for the same reasons. Paper clips or binder clips. These lets you store related materials in one place. For example, if you create several decks of index cards, this lets you hold them together so they won't get mixed up with each other, or worse, mixed up with cards from other prototypes. Glass beads, sometimes called spent stones in different colors. These make great markers, counters, and playing pieces, just like in the given figure. Dice of varying types, just like in the given figure or image. 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, and 20 sided. Several of each type in different colors. These provide independent random variables as opposed to the dependent randomness of the card draws. Note that the dice can also make decent playing pieces that can simultaneously store a single number on them. For example, a 6-sided die could represent a warrior with up to 6 hit points. A small bag of low-value coins. Coins make good markers. They can be flipped for a random variable. They have two sides, so they can represent either of two states, such as which of two players currently controls them, and they can be stacked more easily than dice or glass beads. Colored sticky notes, just like in the given image. Small round adhesive labels. You can put them on stones, dice, or pennies to mark them, differentiate them, or customize them. You can write on the dice to provide additional information if needed. A paper notebook that is kept with your prototypes and used exclusively for taking notes in playtest. This is not something you want to accidentally lose track of your game development. In summary, we could say that the first step to the iterative process is the initial design. The process of game design can be viewed as having successive layering of constraints. The first thing that happens in the design is that you must come up with the basic core of an idea. The entire purpose of prototyping is to maximize the number of iterative cycles. Programming is wonderful and powerful, but it is also slow and expensive in comparison to paper prototypes. For this lessons activity, form a 5-member group and make a documentation of how to generate a game idea by selecting at least 3 of the starting points on how to generate. Follow the given format and post your file in the Week 5 channel of our MS team and include the names of the members of the group. So here is the given format. That's it for now. Thank you for watching and hope you enjoyed this video. For inquiries, feel free to post your questions in our group chat. In our next video, we will discuss all about decision making. Don't forget to visit the links in the references section for more information about this lesson. See you in the next video.